lean in because he has a job and some information that a lot of us probably wouldn't want to have, so we can learn a lot from him. So everyone stand up and give it up for Pastor Bart.
I've got a job that none of y'all would want. Well, I hope somebody wants it, because one day we're going to need somebody to take it. Right? I'm not going to live forever. Everybody doing good?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Good lunch? Yeah. Got some Moe's, got some Chick-fil-A. Is that okay? I can't figure out if I want to sit or stand. Let's try this again. Figure it out though. So we're going to do budgeting today, right? To the sound of some drilling and hammering and different things like that. So we're going to have a good time. So church budgeting and ministry departments. How many of you are planning to be in vocational ministry? You're going to be on staff. You believe you're going to be on staff at a church one day. Okay? Over half the room. So to you guys, I would say definitely lean in. You're gonna need this. If you don't lean in, you're gonna miss this one day. Gosh, y'all was a little slow. I expected you guys to go with me there a little quicker. Those of you who are not going to be in vocational ministry, or you don't know if you're going to be in vocational ministry, the principles transfer. Because really what we're talking about is stewardship. And stewardship is a very important deal, no matter whether you're working for a church, whether you're working for a big corporation, whether you own your own business, whether you're an entrepreneur, no matter what you're going to do, if you have to learn stewardship. You have to learn how to manage things and lead people, right? You lead people, you manage things. Well, resources are something that you're going to have to manage. So that's what we're talking about today. And I like to start by saying you can have anything you want. Anything you want. In the context of budgeting, you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. Okay? It's about priority setting. It's about deciding what is the most important things in my department, in my ministry, in my business, in my occupation, no matter what it is. That's a true statement, but it's loaded with tension. It's really a statement of priorities that is really, and that's really what a budget is all about. It prioritizes what must happen in ministry, which requires us to focus on core values and how to have the greatest impact to accomplish the vision. It requires us to get very focused. It requires us to pay attention to what God is saying, not just about what we like. And I think in many contexts, not just budgeting, guidelines, guardrails, defining what the sandbox is, actually increases creativity. It doesn't limit it. Even creatives are most creative within a context of time, space, resources. Everybody is that way. You artists even, and again, I'm not one, but even artists will say, when I know that a song needs to be written or a group of songs needs to be written within a certain period of time, it's amazing how creative we get when we get super focused on what we're doing. Creativity flows from constraint, from tension, not the other way around. Most pastors and church staffs are not thrilled about the idea of budget. I'll be honest with you. whenever September or so, August, September rolls around, there's not every department head doesn't just go, yes, it's time to budget. I think we're getting a little closer to that. They understand the importance of it now, and they understand that it actually lets them dream a little bit. And I think over the last couple of years, we've gotten a little better at it becoming a little more of an exciting time. I still wouldn't rate it in the top 20 things that they probably look forward to. But we're getting there. We're moving the ball forward. So it's not one of the most exciting things, but serving in a church that has a budget with no connection to reality or no real budget at all is a grenade waiting to explode. It's not a matter of if it's all going to hit the fan. It's a matter of when. When you don't plan, you plan to fail. And that's really what a budget is. A budget is a plan. It's putting something down on paper that says, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get to these goals that we've got. These are the steps that we're going to take to do that. Operating with no budget is not freedom in the spirit. It is poor stewardship and unwise leadership. That's what it is. And so many times, I think we use the Holy Spirit and being led by the Spirit sometimes as a crutch in the church. People want to attribute flying by the seat of your pants to walking by the Spirit. Not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. As a matter of fact, God is a very organized, very structured, very planned out God. He doesn't fly by the seat of his pants, and I can't find anywhere in Scripture, anywhere in the instruction manual that he gives us, where he encourages that. It is a plan. So that's what budgeting is. So here's where do you start when you start thinking about budgeting? I encourage everybody to do this. I urge our staff, I'll urge you today. In the budgeting process, start with the idea that you have enough. Don't ever allow yourself to fall into the temptation or the hole of starting with the idea that, well, Pastor Bart says I've only got this amount of money and we can't do effective ministry with that. Because if you do, and it's just like so many other things in life, if you start from there, you've got a built-in excuse for why you're going to fail. And you just compounded the percentages of you failing multiple times over. If you start off with saying, my ministry could be more successful if I was given more money, then you just about guarantee that you're not going to have as good of results in ministry that year as you could have had. So always start this budgeting process, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, with the idea that I have enough. I have enough. God will always provide financially for what he calls us to do. God always gives provision for the vision that he gives. He may not give provision for your vision. Okay, if those are two different things. If you haven't sought him and you haven't heard from him and you don't know what his vision is, then he may not give provision for that vision. But God will always give provision for what he tells us to do, for what he calls us to do. The problem comes in when we do things that God has not called us to do. Just for the record, God never feels pressure to provide for things that he hasn't called us to do. Okay? And I know nobody would ever say that out loud because it would feel awkward for it to actually come out of your mouth and say it. But we live sometimes as if, you know what? If I talk about how awesome and great and godly and impactful this thing could be, then I'm somehow maybe going to twist God's arm and he's going to have to provide for it anyway. Let me just tell you, God doesn't feel that pressure. We cannot pressure God into resourcing something that he didn't call us to do. So no matter how good that thing is, God is not going to ever supernaturally step in and give provision to something that he hasn't called you to do, even if it's good. This always causes what I believe is a healthy amount of tension and pressure on us to seek out what is God's true will for this. Because if you haven't been there yet, I'll raise my hand. I have been in this place I'm about to describe. I have gone out there and tried to do some really, 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 really good things in ministry, and it wasn't what God told me to do. And let me tell you something. It is bitterly lonely there. And God doesn't always come through in that situation. I had to fall on my face and learn a very valuable lesson in that God doesn't bless good things, God blesses God things. And there's a big difference between the two of them. So it's on us to spend the amount of time that we need to in God's presence, in his word, through prayer, to make sure that we know that God is telling us to do something. Not, boy, that would be a really cool thing to do in such and such ministry. Okay? Everybody good?
Yes.
All right. So let me say it again. It's essential to view what you have as enough. Because that is what God has provided to do what he wants done. So we've got to figure out. Listen, if perfect scenario, I had a $40,000 ministry budget, but I'm given a $25,000 ministry budget, guess what? Go start praying and figure out what is the God things that he's called you to do. And my guess is when you get to the end of that, either $25,000 is enough, or you'll get more money when the time is right, even within that budget year. If you don't get more money, then what God wanted done, just make sure that you've prioritized it to make sure that you're doing what he wants done first. Good, everybody got that?
Yes.
The budget allows us to embrace boundaries and to focus on the most important things, which forces us to say no to our good plan so that we can say yes to the great plan that God's got. So it really comes down to prioritizing. What's the biggest impact on what God wants done that I can have within my department? It's really stewardship. It's really deciding what is the most important things. You may be required to make some major adjustments, but we all have to do that in different seasons. We all have to decide. We all have to change courses. We all realize sometimes in April that, hey, I'm just 10%, 10 degrees off. I need to line back up, and we can do that. You're never going, as long as you're breathing air, you're never going to be in an environment where that never happens to you. Okay? I've learned, I've failed and I've learned, and I've failed and I've learned, and I've succeeded and I've learned, and I've failed and I've learned, and I've failed and I've learned, and I've failed and I've learned, and I've succeeded and I've learned. Okay? But every season you're going to have those things. You just have to learn from them. And you have to adjust. You have to adjust based on what the resources are that God is providing for you. Things can always get tough. But you have to remember you have enough. So you have to start there. I know I've said that a couple of times, but I want to pound that into your brains. That way, whenever you are sitting in a ministry position one day, or in a position of running your own company, or in a position of leading people within a company that you're working for, that you realize that is the starting point. I have enough. I have enough to do what God wants me to do. How you view that thought and how you lead in organizational finances reflects your personal theology about that statement. The resources of our church are entrusted to us in order to maximize kingdom return. Not to give us a playground to do the things we really like to do. Okay? That can get confusing sometimes for people. I understand that this is really, really cool and it would be super, super fun to do that. But resources are not given to you so that you can have a fun time. Resources are given to you for your area of ministry to have the greatest kingdom impact that year as we can possibly have, in alignment with the vision of the house. You see the difference? And nobody ever answers that with, yeah, you know what? I really just want to spend my budget on fun, cool things that I like to do. Nobody would say that. But we all get 10 degrees off, 20 degrees off, and we have to come back to alignment. We're stewards of God's money. We have a responsibility to maximize that return on that money. And God's paying attention. He's watching. He's seeing not only the small things, but he's seeing the big things too. He is looking at every single decision that we make as leaders to know, can I trust this person? Pastor Trey did a great job of explaining that with the tithe this weekend. It's a test. Your budget as a leader, as a ministry leader, as a business leader, whatever it is, your job is to steward that well. And if you do, it's a test, and you either pass the test, or thank God with the way God works, you retake the test. And you will retake the test until you pass the test. God never gives up on us, but we are stewards, and it is our responsibility to maximize God's return on the resources that he gives us in a budget, with tithes, with offerings, and everything else. That's why it does matter. $50 matters. Because again, if you can't manage $50 well, then why would God ever give you $5,000? He won't. Stewardship has to run through every part of our life. Listen, if you're driving a beat up junker right now, and you want God to give you a better car, you better take care of that beat up junker. Because God's paying attention. Because if you can't manage that well, why would he give you something nicer to manage?
Right.
That's a principle, okay? It's not just about budgeting. This is a principle. You know, Pastor Trey said, the tithe is not just the law. It's not just the Old Testament. It's not just the New Testament. It is a principle that God's kingdom works off of. This is a principle that God's kingdom works off of, and it's called stewardship. And that's why it's important. So, you know the story, but I'm gonna take just a minute and read it to you. Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. I'm actually going to pick up in verse 19. This is a parable of, is one of many passages that gives a depth to this truth of stewardship. Verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with these 5 bags of gold, and see, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Verse 28. So take the bag of gold. I'm skipping down to 28 now to save time. So he gets to the last servant who had the 1 bag. And he dug a hole, put it in there. He said, I knew you were a hard man. So all I'm going to do, all I'm interested in doing is returning to you what was yours. And he thought that was going to be okay. So he says in verse 28, so take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You see, God has an investment. And he has investment alternatives. He has a diverse portfolio. And if he sees that he needs to move resources from this portfolio into another portfolio, he will do that. Because he is a great steward. He expects that from us as well. He looks at with kingdom resources in this way. We invest different amounts in different things with different amounts of risk. That's natural, but God wants to see results. God is a God of results. So whenever you're given money for the kingdom, you need to make sure that every dollar of that is invested in a way that can bring about the most kingdom results, that can bring back the most people becoming fully alive, can bring back the most people coming to know Christ, can bring back the most people having a deeper, different understanding of who Jesus is versus what their upbringing or what their ignorance is about God. God's watching that. He's seeing if you're stewarding. So it's very, very, very important. Okay, so you've got the heart, right? So I wanted to spend the first little bit of time on hopefully giving you the heart and the importance of why we budget, why we steward, why we have to be good stewards. So let's get practical a little bit, okay? So how do you build and operate a church budget? So hopefully you've got the heart. Now let's talk about the how. First, you've got to identify what you have, not what you need. Don't start with what you need, because we have a tendency to lie to ourselves, okay? If you start with what you need, you will somehow lie to yourself and tell yourself that you have more than what you actually have to meet that need. Start off with what you have, and then let's prioritize. So this is not a lack of faith. It's just how you build a budget. If your vision exceeds your resources, then you take that to God. Okay? And you cast vision to people. But what you don't do is pretend that you have more than what you actually do. Okay? So if the ends don't meet, if the vision and the need is greater than the resources, then you go to God and pray and say, God, I need more. Help me see how we can do better here. Or God may return and say, okay, cast vision to the people, which Pastor Trey did an excellent job of casting vision about what the tithe means, how important it is, how it's a blessing not only to the church, but God's intention is for it to be a blessing to the person, not just to the church. So you pray to God, and then you go cast vision. But until one of those two things has an impact, you go with what you have. You make the plan with what you have. You can't pretend that you've got more than you actually do. So next, you're going to allocate what you have according to predetermined guidelines that are established based on principles and priorities. Okay? So here at City Hope, we look at it and we say, okay, what are the way that we're budgeting, is the way that we're budgeting lining up with our core values? Is there anything about the way that we're budgeting that is not in alignment with what we have said and stated and understand that the vision is? If it is, then we need to start changing there. We have to start saying, okay, we're not doing these things because clearly they don't align with the vision. And there's one person on our staff that has a terrible reputation for a story that he says wasn't his idea, it was somebody else's, but I'm leaving it on him. That when you come with an idea that says, okay, here's my idea, I need circus clowns, jungle tigers, baby oil, and 10,000 bouncy balls. I don't know if that is going to fit into the alignment of people becoming fully alive in Christ, right? So we joke with this person all the time. I'm not going to tell you who it is. That would be bad. But we have to tell this person all the time. He'll come with an idea, and when he says, hey, I've got an idea. We say, well, does it involve jungle tigers and baby oil and bouncy balls? Because if it does, we're not doing it. But you have to begin to allocate the resources based on core values. Is this going to cause someone to take a step towards Christ? Is this going to help someone become fully alive in Jesus Christ? If it's not, then those things are typically easy to see. Those things typically get weeded out really quickly. And then, does it meet the criteria of, okay, we've already decided here are the 2 or 3 key things that we want to accomplish within that vision. Okay, so it's layered. If you get the middle picture of, you got core values, those are it's easy a lot of times to figure out when things don't line up there. Okay, then we have measurable wins or primary wins that are underneath those core values, that support those core values. And every ministry area, every department will have those primary wins, those measurable wins that support the core values. So then we start saying, okay, does this amount of money that you want to spend on this, does it align with your primary wins for your ministry department? If it doesn't, then okay, we're going to put it over here. Because we're going to make sure that before we start allocating any resources to these things, that the resources for the things that we know we're going to do are satisfied. Does that make sense? That's pretty easy, right? So we allocate what you have according to predetermined guidelines that are established by principles and priorities. So you invest your monies according to the vision and the desire to move the growth and health of the church forward. Don't fund certain things because you like doing it, or because of politics, or strong personalities who really want to do these things because they're fun, or because you've always done it in the past. Who cares if we've done it in the past? If it doesn't align and help us move to the goals and the initiatives that we've got for this year, then it doesn't matter if we've done it 6 years in a row. It doesn't matter if we've done this since the church started. If it doesn't move us down the road of being able to accomplish what God's called us to now, then we don't do it. So there are some things. If you find a holy cow, you need to have a barbecue. Kill it and let's eat it and let's move down the road and keep going to what God wants us to do. But you don't fund things just because you've always done it in the past. We don't have an event this year because we had it last year. It needs to fit into what helps us achieve what God's got for us. You've got to monitor your progress and performance. You have to debrief on something that you spent money on to know, did it hit the mark? And you can't come up with what the mark is after it, because that doesn't work. That's shooting an arrow on the side of a barn and then drawing a bullseye after the arrow is stuck in the barn. You'll hit that every time, right? You draw the bullseye first and then you shoot the arrow. Okay? So you decide, what does a win look like before we do this thing? And then we go back and talk about what we decided the wins were before the thing and determine did we do it. That's going to determine whether or not this is something we should ever do again in the future. Okay? So if it failed, maybe we still do it, but we have to tweak it because we have to steward the resources of what God gave us for that. Okay? So you monitor your progress and your performance. It's important to keep up with your spend rate every single month. Now, if people have a budget and they're not looking at it until their overseer comes to them and says, hey, what's going on with this? Then that's a real problem. It should be something that when there's a problem, the person who oversees that budget should be coming to their overseer and letting them know there's a problem. It should never be the other way around. You need, as a leader, you need to be out in front of good news, and you need to be out in front on bad news as well. Your overseer should not be informing you of bad news. You should be informing them of bad news and good news. The only thing worse than running out of money is to be unaware that you're running out of money. Okay? The only thing worse than something failing is for you not to know it's failing. So stay current and accurate. Now, we've got a great tool called Intact that our church staff uses. Anyone who oversees a budget has access to a dashboard, and it shows them real time based on request. They don't even have to have the money spent yet. If they have requested money and money has been approved, it's in there and they see how it affects their budget. So any department head in our church right now that has a question of where am I month to date and year to date on my budget, that information is up to date probably as of Friday, right now, for them. So they've got real time, so there's no excuse for them not to know where they stand and where they're at. So stay current with your spend rate, adjust to changing circumstances based on principles and priorities. That's the tough part, because we get very emotionally attached to what we do in ministry. Okay, and when we get to July and budget is an issue, and there's this thing in October that we really, really wanted to do, but there's not money for, okay, we may not be able to do that. And usually it only takes one time of that not happening, and you'll be amazed at how close that person will watch it next year. Like, they won't let the budget get away from them January through June next year, because they really want to do that thing in October, right? So make sure you're watching where it's going. Make sure you know where you are, and then you've got to adjust all the time. It's constantly adjusting. In most cases, it's more about deciding where you can cut back until you get into a better cash position. But that's the process of prioritizing and the importance of making a good budget on the front end, so you have to do that less often. So here's some basics of church budget setting. And there's a dozen good ways to do this. I'm only going to give you a couple. But I think this is probably the simplest and easiest to understand, and it works. It's actually a good one too. So whether you're a senior pastor, whether you're going to be a senior pastor, whether you're going to be someone on staff who's overseeing a ministry area, this will work. So you take your projected attendance. So this is going to be a little bit of a formula that you can use to budget. Take your projected attendance and multiply that times your average giving per person, per adult. Okay, so if you've, I may give you an example too if we've got time. Are we till 2?
Yes.
Okay, so we may have a couple of minutes that I can give you some examples maybe on the whiteboard. So you take your projected attendance, adult attendance, you multiply that times the average giving per person. Now that varies a little bit for us by campus. Okay, Malvis has the highest average giving per adult in attendance, and again, the way you're doing that is if you have $500,000 given, and you've got 500 adults in attendance that weekend, then your average giving per adult is $1,000 per adult. You get how that goes? No, it's not. Our average across all campuses, oh gosh, I wish it was. Boy, the things that we could do in ministry if that was the case. Across all of our campuses right now, we're a little over $40 given per week per adult in attendance. So you take projected attendance by average giving per adult. You don't count kids in that, because literally kids don't, they give change most of the time. They give different things like that, and that's great. We need to be teaching it. I haven't talked to Pastor Chris in a while to know whether or not we're giving opportunity in kids' church or not, but we need to be teaching kids from as young as they can understand it that giving is important, and what you give, God sees. Again, the widow who gave the 2 mites, Jesus took notice of, right? He said she gave more than any of the rest of them, right? Because she gave everything. She gave everything she had. So hopefully we're doing that, but for the purposes of budgeting, we're looking at adult attendance only. So it would be if Malvis had, say, 2,000 adults this past weekend, times average giving per adult, say $40, and then you take that and then you get a forecasted income. You multiply that times 52 weeks, across that, and then that's going to give you a yearly budgeted amount that you can begin the conversation then of, do we feel comfortable with this? And then what I'll do, once we do that little bit of math, I'll take a look and say, okay, what was our total given last year? Now, does this line up? I mean, if all of a sudden we've got a projection that's going to be a 40% increase over what actually was given last year, I might say, okay, hold on. I understand we just did this little equation here, but we're not going to run with that because I'm not comfortable budgeting, forecasting a 40% increase in our budget. So if we say, hey, it looks like we could see a 40% increase this year, we may set the budget at more like about an 18% increase. Let's make sure that's going to come in, and if we need to adjust, we'll adjust. We can do that. So we'll take this. So if you're at a church, and again, let's say you have 500 adults in attendance, and the national average is somewhere between $25 and $30 per adult in attendance. So our church is a generous church. You see that? The national average is just under $30. We're over $40 per adult in attendance. So that's not news to you. The numbers are news to you. But you guys already know we have a very generous church. We have very generous people at our church. Let's just take the average and say times 30. Who's good at math? You can give it to me real quick.
Yeah.
What's that? 1,500, right? Is that right? No, it's 15,000. Count the zeros, boy. I'm the guy with the finances. Okay, so $15,000 per what? No, this is per adult, per week, right? So we're looking at that would be a weekly number. Okay, so we're going to take that. Whoever got your calculator out, help me here, because I butchered the whole thing with a whole bunch of zeros. It should have been easy. I'm really going to butcher this. So 15,000 times 52 is what? 780?
Yeah. Just 780.
Okay, so a church of roughly 500 adults in attendance. If their giving per adult is $30, which is around a little bit more than the national average, would be $15,000 a week in income times 52 weeks. That if there was a pastor at a church of that size who was saying, hey, we're going to set our budget at $1 million, I probably would counsel him, I don't think that's a good idea, because there's a good chance that you could be getting to September or October and really figuring out that you're in a bad spot. Okay? And hey, but if you set it at $750,000 and $1 million comes in, guess what? Now you can begin to do some dream vision kind of things that maybe God has put in your heart and you didn't know where it was going to come from. You know, God supplies supernaturally that way too. Okay? Where you very diligently plan a budget that makes sense, and then God supplies over that, and you enact the things that God's put in your heart at that time. Not ahead of time to borrow money and all that good stuff. Okay, so under that scenario, you have $780,000 to spend. We track and look at that very closely here at City Hall. Every single week, I know what each campus's average giving per adult in attendance is every single week. Luckily, I don't do the math on it. We have a software that does that for me, so the numbers are correct, which is good. Pastor Trey, if you're watching this ever, I am good at math. So we look at that. So let's take an example. I'll give you some ideas of, okay, how do we break this up now? Again, we'll just use this church as an example, this fictitious $780,000 per year budgeted income, 500 adults kind of deal. What we try to do here at City Hope, and we're almost there, I think we're really, really close to being able to operate this way, is we would take them that $780,000, and here's the way we divide it up at 10,000 feet, a 10,000 foot view, and then it kind of gets granular from there. Okay, so let me walk you through that. We would take 45% of that amount, and that goes to personnel and staffing. Okay, that's all salaries, that's benefits, health insurance, dental insurance, retirement that the church matches what they put in. What else? That's payroll, taxes, Social Security, everything. Everything that has anything to do with somebody getting paid or the benefits that they receive gets rolled up into that 45%. We give a minimum of 10% to missions. You guys can see Pastor Trey put the number up this past weekend. It was over $1.1 million. You saw that? To missions and outreach. That did not equal 10%. That equaled like 14%. Okay? So if we're gonna be more generous in an area, that's one of the areas we're gonna do it. We're gonna give it away. The number of times through the years, and Pastor Trey has echoed this sentiment with me multiple times since he took over. But for years, Pastor Jerry would come and it'd get tight. I mean, finances may be tight, and he would look. We would have a meeting, and he would say, "We're going to give our way out of this. We're not going to clam up. We're not going to hold tighter now because we're in a tight spot. We're going to give our way out of this." And I remember one time in particular, it was really, really tight, and we were believing God that we needed a substantial amount of money to come in. And we were literally pulling resources from everywhere where we could get it. And he said, we're going to give $60,000. It was one time, one check. We're going to give $60,000 to this missionary who's getting ready to do something. And what they were needing to do was very similar to what we were needing to do. And the pastor said, that's where we're going to sow that seed. It's going to go there because we'll do for them what we need. And that's operating God's principle of kingdom. It was kingdom. So we've done that. So 10% to missions and outreach is a minimum. I don't know if there's ever been a year in almost 10 years that we have not given more than 10% to that. Local ministry area departments. So that would worship, kids, youth, all of the ministry area departments is 12%. Facilities, which includes debt, leases, utilities, upkeep, maintenance, everything that there is about facilities is 21%. 4% operations, which is a lot of stuff. It's all the way down to the paper and the copiers and the telephones that we have. So 4% operations, and then what we're still working on is getting this number to this, and we're making progress. But this is ideal. What I would love to do is 8% to margin. And that margin amount at the end of the year could go to debt reduction, could go to new campuses that we want to plant, and then the unexpected. Because how many know that you can absolutely expect for the unexpected to happen? That is a fact. I love is it Allstate? Okay, mayhem is there. I mean, mayhem is going to happen. So you have to expect the unexpected to happen. You know it's coming, you just don't know what it is. So So that's it. 45, 10, 12, 21, 4, and 8 is how we try to work it in. So there's no right or wrong approach to the percentages. Here's the deal. As a leader, Pastor Trey gets to decide what those percentages are. And there's no right or wrong percentages. But whatever you decide, you need to stick to it. It needs to be something that has some concrete point of it. That hey, this is where we're going. Personally, I don't think that personnel costs should go over 50%. The national average of churches in the United States, the national average is 50%. So to me, that's our top end. I don't ever want to see personnel expenses, staffing expenses go over 50%. So, but I also don't want to see them go below 40. Okay, there's unhealth on both sides of that. Okay, I managed, everything. I was a general manager for a large corporation that's all over the world. I was over the Gulf Coast region, Gulf Coast area for them. And in the business world, again, I had never been in this seat in a church position before. I was a pastor for 12 years, but never did anything on the business side in a church. I was a youth pastor and later an associate pastor. So always on the ministry side, never on the operations business side. So that corporate experience was the first experience that I had with managing this type of stuff. So I came out of the corporate world, and when I look at my profit and loss statement and what the different numbers needed to be, I needed my personnel, my staffing costs to be 30% or lower to my revenue. Well, I'm thinking, I come in the first year and I'm going, wow, our personnel costs are like 43%. I got to get this down 13%. I quickly found out in a nonprofit, in a church, as I began to study and learn, well, that's not possible. It would be extremely unhealthy for us to be running at 30-35% staffing on that. So I don't think below 40 is healthy. I don't think above 50 is healthy. So somewhere in that 40 to 50%. I always give at least 10% away to missions. I just think that that's in the heart of God. I really believe that God honors that. I believe that God wants that. I know it's one kingdom. I know the church is a capital C church. But as God blesses us, I think Pastor Trey did such a great job of painting a picture that we individually, but also we as a church, are not a reservoir for God's blessings. We are a river for God's blessings to flow through. So as God blesses each of us individually, that's the case. As God blesses City Hope Church, our little piece of the capital C church, then we need to be a river of that blessing that flows out to other small C churches that are in the capital C church with us. Missionaries and different things like that. So I think it's important that we exercise that faith to do that. And I think never exceed 15% of debt. 15% of the budget should never be going, more than that should never be going to debt. We're going to get to the point where 0% of our budget is going to debt. I want to get out of debt. But that's a work and that's a process for us to get there. Always have a line for margin, even if it's 1%. Even if it's so small, because it's something for you to hold yourself accountable to. Pastor Trey mentioned again, and I keep referencing, but the message this weekend was incredible. I hope as you guys were serving that you got to sit in a service and just soak it in too. But Pastor Trey said, listen, if 10% just is not possible right now, literally you are drowning in debt and don't know how you're going to buy food, start somewhere. Start somewhere and just commit that as God blesses, you're going to add. And 3 months from now, you're going to be at 2%, and then 4%, and 8%. And a year from now, you might be at 10%. Okay? Same thing when you're budgeting in church ministry, in church life. Even if that margin line is 1%, put it in there, commit to hitting that number, and commit to increasing it the next year. God will help you be faithful to get that, to where then that margin number can be big enough to where you're doing significant things in big lump sums. You're knocking debt out. You're sending $10,000 to a church planner who's getting ready to launch in 3 months. You know, that's capital C thinking. That's capital C heart. So always have a line for margin, even if it's small. So let's look at how you would build a ministry budget. And let's just say we'll use an example of kids ministry. Okay? So we talked about the church as a whole. Now let's get down into the department with kids. So what is the highest, and we'll be a little interactive here, okay? You guys play with me and get some feedback. So in regards to the example of kids ministry, as your budget, let's just say, let me throw it out there that we're all kind of trying to figure out this kids ministry budget. You've got $20,000 in your kids ministry budget. What's first? What's priority number one? What's the most important aspect that has to be attended to in kids ministry?
Service experience.
Okay. Hello. There's going to be 52 kids services, right? Every year. So we better start there. Because guess what? If mom and dad comes to church and in September and there's no budget and you just shut kids ministry down, we probably wouldn't do that, right? But you ran out of budget in September and we just shut kids ministry down, mom and dad's probably not coming back, right? They're going to be like, I'm going to a church that's got kids ministry. That's it. So we better have the budget allocated to have 52 kids services, right? So that's great. That's where you start. What all is included in that?
I think that would be included stuff like Pro Presenter, all the Adobe stuff that you need for that. Obviously TV speakers.
Yeah.
Equipment, mainly flex.
A lot of that stuff is one-time expenses.
Right.
Let's get a little more granular and dig down into other than the things that you see in this room that are here and they're already paid for. What's a weekly expense? Games? Yep. Huh? Curriculum?
Or like the volunteer t-shirts.
Yep.
Like in order for them to have stuff to like represent. But I would say like if they choose curriculum, you'd have to like buy the package or whatever.
Right.
That'd be a one-time expense.
You know, buy
Curriculum would be usually about by the year. What about diapers? You got a nursery, right? Usually moms have diapers in their own diaper bag. But you got those little goldfish things, right? That you got to feed the kids. The paper for the changing tables. So I don't want to get too far down that road. But what I'm telling you is, you're gonna have holes all in your budget unless you get some people who know the different areas of the ministry that you're in. You better get them in a room, and you better start brainstorming. Hey, what are the steps? Let's just think about a weekend. What all is going to happen in that weekend? And we better have money associated with the things that have to happen. You see how that works? So it does get granular with that. So when you get 52 weekend kids services planned out, and let's just say that $20,000, that just took half of it. You spent $10,000 just on your curriculum, your goldfish, your little doctor's office paper stuff that's going to be on the changing tables for the baby's butts to be on, all that kind of stuff. You spent half your budget. Okay, now you got, let's say, $10,000. Now, what's next in kids ministry? What will be the next most important thing outside of 52 kids services?
Camp.
Who said camp? I would say that would be one of the bigger deals, right? So we know we're going to do camp. So we've got to decide, okay, how much of that $10,000 needs to be allocated to camp? Now we know we're going to have registration, right? So we're going to get money in for camp. But is the money that we get in going to be all that we're going to need to do the camp? Maybe, may not be. But it would be healthy to know that on the front end, right? You better have historical data to know what it costs. When I first couple of years, I kept noticing that just we had weird stuff showing up in budget line items. Like, and I would go to people and I'd say, hey, why do we have kids curriculum? And this is not a real, nobody actually did this. But why do we have kids curriculum in a volunteer meals line? Why are you doing that? Well, I didn't have any money left in curriculum, and I had money left in volunteer meals, so I just figured keep that from going over in that area. I would just put that in this. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Well, how are we going to know what we spend on curriculum next year? We won't. So you'll be back in the same blind state that you're in right now next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So let's make sure we're assigning expenses where they're supposed to be, even if that puts you over in that lineup. And hey, let's move money from volunteer food over into curriculum to get it up. You see what I'm saying? So you go look at historical data to know, okay, last year and the year before that and 3 years before that and so on and so on, we had to do this, this, and this, and this for kids camp. So we know if we set kids camp registration at $200, but it's going to cost $204 per kid to do camp. Well, we're going to say we're going to have 100 kids, and it's $4. We're over by $4, so we've got to budget now out of our kids' budget to meet that deficit, right? Okay, so camp's a good one. What else?
Conferences.
Okay, you may have a conference. Kids got most last several years. Our kids staff has gone to Orange Conference in Atlanta. So it's a great kids conference, but it costs money. Great thing is Atlanta is close enough to drive, so pretty much it's the conferences are cheap. Like most conferences are $149 or less to attend the conference. Your money comes in travel to get there, hotels, and food. That's where all the money comes from going to conference. So you have to budget for that if we want to continue to get better at doing kids ministry. We have to go learn from people who do it better than we do. Anything else? Volunteer appreciation, yeah. Mm-hmm. So again, but as you're prioritizing these things, not that volunteer appreciation is not super important, because it is absolutely vital. But you can't budget, you wouldn't budget those dollars before you budgeted the 52 kids services for the year, right? So it's priority. So make sure that you're in line with that. Okay, any questions? Now we're right on time, but if you've got some general questions about the information that I covered, or just some stuff that I didn't cover that you're curious about.
What is the elder have anything that they do with the budget?
Yes, our elders approve any kind of indebtedness that we're going to go into, and they approve the budget every single year. So the elders may not know this is how much kids ministry gets, but they approve that. They are absolutely approving this number. Yeah. And most of the large things, like they would know exactly how much is budgeted towards debt are, that's already been indebted to us, and then anything that we were planning to do that could indebt more, the church more, they would have to approve that. So yeah, the elders approve the budget.
Everything you said about budget was kind of, you base it off the year before. What would you do in like a church plant scenario, like if you're starting without any prior knowledge of like the year?
Yeah. Pray really hard to God about what that number is. What I would say in that scenario, I'm kidding, but not kidding. You better be praying because God needs to share some insight to you. But the insight that God could share with you could be a number. It could be some real insight on this top number here. Hey, because listen, in a church planning situation, listen, you may launch with 150 people, and typically what happens in church planning, if you launch with 150, guess what happens week 2? That 150 goes down to about 80. And then you start the climb back. Okay? So you have to, in a church planning situation, I wouldn't budget by the year. I'd budget by the month. I'd be setting a monthly budget if I was a church planner, and knowing that, hey, month 1, I'm going to count on those 80 people, 80 adults. And then month 2, I'm going to say, we're going to be at 90. And so on and so on. I would try to be very, very conservative. Again, it's okay if this winds up being $1 million. But let's don't budget for it to be $1 million. Let's go just below what we think the numbers are going to tell us that they're going to be. So that's a whole different animal. I'm telling you, church planners are some of the closest people to God that you'll ever meet, I think.
That's going to still have to factor attendance.
Say again?
That you still have to factor attendance.
Yeah, the church planning, yeah. You have no idea who's going to come, who's going to be there. Anybody else?
So when you were talking about how God always provides like the provision for the vision,
Yeah.
what is kind of like the line to draw between like steps you take and then just being like, oh, well, God's going to provide
Yeah.
for the vision? I think there's ground for that. I mean, I think that there is an element to where you just believe God to come through. I would never want to operate in an environment in a church where that was a part of it. But at the same time, I know I have seen it in churches past that I've been on staff at, that there's almost a sloppy expectation. Like, I'm going to be sloppy in my planning. I'm going to be sloppy in my stewardship. And I'm just going to say, God, you better come through at the same time. You understand what I'm saying? I don't think you should ever set, or at least for us, let me just say that, because it could be different for somebody else. At City Hope, we're probably not going to set the budget, 2020's budget, higher than what actual income, actual tithe and offering was in 2019. Okay? Even if we believe we're going to grow 20% in people, we're probably only, our ceiling of what we're going to budget for 2020